Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the Spotlight series. Let me just share this screen. Thanks for everyone for joining today on our webinar on communicating your research. It is the last webinar in this series for communicating your research, and it will be the last for 2024. Next year, we will have some new topics for everyone, and we really look forward to that. Today, we're joined by two experts in communication, two very experienced people in this topic, and is Callum McPherson from SAMRI and Tullio Rossi from Animate Your Science. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region. We recognize the Kaurna people's cultural, spiritual, physical, and emotional connection with their land. We honor and pay our respects to Kaurna elders past and present, and all generations of Kaurna people now and into the future. Now, I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Agustina Gancia, and I lead all the capacity building initiatives at Health Translation SA. We run different initiatives, including the Spotlight series around what is research translation, how can we better improve the translation of evidence into practice and policy. And Spotlight series is one of our main initiatives where we deliver webinars on a weekly basis for the duration of 1 month. We provide links to available trainings in that specific topic. We provide links to online resources that exist and to support researchers or clinician researchers or community members on that specific topic, and links to publications as well. It's an initiative that we launched in 2021, a few years ago now, and we've run now 9 Spotlight series spanning different topics such as implementation science, co-design, research impact, creating partnerships between research and policymakers, and community and consumer involvement, just to name a few. So I highly recommend you visit the HTSA website to find out more. I briefly mentioned who HTSA is. We try to accelerate the application of research findings into policy and practice, and we do that by acting as an independent catalyst and a broker to mobilize collaborations across the state. We are partnering with 11 different organizations, which include SAMRI, which is where we're based, SA Health, including all the local health networks, the different universities in South Australia, CSIRO, primary health networks, and the Commission on Excellence and Innovation in Health, as well as the Aboriginal Health Council of SA. They're all our partners, and we are one of 14 translation centers across Australia, so we are not alone in this. And just quickly, our vision is to improve health outcomes in South Australia through research translation. Our purpose is to enable the timely and effective adoption of research outcomes across the South Australian health system. And like I said, our way of working is by being the catalyst, the connector. We link, researchers to key health services who, help identify what the health service priorities are. And we really try to connect both to ensure that the research that's produced in South Australia actually gets used down the line. So yes. And this is more of the same. So basically, we connect with different fields to ensure that scientific evidence can positively impact health of South Australians. As I mentioned, we have two excellent presenters today. We have Tullio Rossi from Animate Your Science and Callum McPherson from our own SAMRI. I'll present both presenters. I'll introduce both presenters and hand over to Callum, and then he'll hand over to Tullio, and we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So if you have any burning questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat box. I'll be monitoring them as they deliver their presentations, and we can have some time for discussion at the end. So I'll present Callum first, and then I'll introduce Tullio. So Callum is SAMRI's Media and Production Officer. He's responsible for coordinating external media engagement and internal content creation. He's a former 7 News reporter. Callum worked in television for 4 years in Queensland and South Australia before making the switch to SAMRI's media communications team in 2020. He's also the creator and the host of Young Blood, men's mental health podcast, and the A Window on SAMRI podcast. Tulio is an award-winning science communicator. He's a marine biologist and a graphic designer. He's the founder of the science communication agency Animate Your Science, and he helps researchers tell their story to the world. His engaging video animations and eye-catching graphics make science understandable for everyone, reaching millions of people around the world, thereby creating real-life impact, which is what we want. So like I said, before I hand it over to Callum, please, if you have questions or comment, please put them in the question and answer or the chat box. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand it over to Callum. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Agustina. I'll just share. Hey. All right, that was a great intro, so I won't repeat what was said there. We'll just get straight into it. So, why would you bother with putting yourself in the media? It can be quite a confronting thing to do, especially if you're not used to it. But there are some really good reasons why we do it, which you should consider in putting your work forward. So, first of all, it's in the public interest. People want to know what you're doing. They care about health research. They have people in their lives who are struggling with this, that, and the other. They themselves are concerned about their own health. It's something that everyone is really interested in. So always keep that in mind. Can garner community and government support by putting out there what your work is about. It's one thing to do your research. It's another thing to actually let people know, let the community know, and make people understand what you're doing. There's no use in just doing your work in a silo if no one ever hears about it or knows about it. This is how we generate philanthropic funding. This is how you get donors to understand the work that you do and inspire philanthropists and people who can provide funding to choose your project. It's also hugely beneficial for clinical trial recruitment. So often researchers will come to us when they're recruiting for a trial, and we'll work on putting a story out because it's an excellent tool to be able to drum up some recruitment. We often have trials that are half full or haven't got anyone, and then after doing a story, they'll get a handful to even a dozen participants. So it can be a massively beneficial tool in that regard. It's great for your reputation, building your reputation over time, being able to have a compilation of stories and you'd be able to show that throughout your history and point to it is hugely helpful in communicating with donors and communicating with other academics and showing the work that you do. Can also help in grant applications. You can cite where your work has been in the media, and that shows that there is attention and focus on what you do and helps get grants over the line. And you can establish yourself as a go-to expert in the field, someone who people want to come to discuss a particular topic. You can be the one that the media calls on whenever your field of expertise is brought up, and that's really something that we should aspire to. And it can also attract collaboration from other experts, other academics who are hearing about your work and might want to collaborate with you, and also young talent, the next generation, when they're deciding on where they want to go. If they see you and your work in the news, that might attract them to want to come and work with you, which is another reason. And this content that we generate can be shared across platforms to let the whole community know what you're doing. So at SAMRI, we have LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all the usuals, and we're constantly sharing the work of our researchers on a daily basis, and that shows the community and everyone at our organisation what we're doing. Okay, so the ingredients for a news story. So we need the hook, we need what's new. So news, new, it needs to be new. There needs to be something that's going to grab people's attention and get people interested. Then there's the science, the expert, which is you. Then the case study or the person affected. So when we're thinking about a news story, it's always about a person. It's about who's being affected. We need to have that relatable aspect to it. It's typical that we'll need a case study, someone who's either living with that disease or has a family member who has had that experience, and the story is about them. And then secondary to that, we talk about the research more broadly and its impacts. It's rare that you have a story that's strictly just the science without the practical application for an actual person that it helps. And if you think about reading the newspaper, there's usually a photograph of a case study, and then we talk about the science. Although in some cases you'll get just the science, but that'll typically just be a smaller story, and that will never make it on its own as a TV news story. For TV, we need the pictures. So there's often circumstances at SAMRI where there aren't heaps of pictures to go with the research that we're talking about. Things are microscopic. There isn't, unless if there's a case study, then we can go to the case study's house. We can film them at home. We can film them getting treatment, these sorts of things. Then we can make it into a TV story. Sometimes if we don't have that, then it's only going to be suitable for digital or for radio. So we've got to think about what pictures can we actually provide, what can we show, and that's why you keep seeing again and again and again scientists in the lab pipetting. Whether or not that is especially relevant to their work, we have to be able to show scientists doing science. So that's why you see those typical shots again and again and again, because they need to be able to fill out their story. And then also if we have a stat, if you're looking at pitching a story and you can think of a particular stat, an attention grabbing statistic that we can use that's simple, then that's always good to add in as well. So how do we actually get media coverage? So we're very proactive here at SAMRI, constantly pitching stories to our media connections. That's often through formally through media releases, and it can also be informally through calling and emailing journalists that we know. We also offer up expert comment, typically for radio to, well, here in Adelaide, 5AA and ABC primarily. And we do that in accordance with the health calendar dates. So just about every day or week or month is a something day. And those are great opportunities to pitch to radio for, hey, we've got someone who specializes in dementia. Last week was Dementia Action Week, so we had someone on. Coming up is World Heart Day, so we've got one of our experts speaking for World Heart Day. So they're really good opportunities to talk on radio. Then there's also reactive media. So because we're very proactive, we've established our researchers as experts that can provide comment. We also get reactive media where those stations come to us and say, hey, can we speak to such and such about this topic that's trending today? And so that's part of the benefit of people establishing themselves as an expert, is that they get repeat business. And that's great because more stories, more communication is always a good thing. When it's the media, it's often a short turnaround. If it's reactive, it's, hey, can I speak to you in the next 2 hours? In the next this evening or tomorrow morning. So you got to be prepared to be able to turn it around quickly. And in those cases, the media is often seeking general comment relating to your expertise rather than a specific study that you're working on. So if we're being proactive and we're pitching it, it's probably about your latest study and your latest discovery and what that means. If we're being reactive, they're probably responding to something that's happened in the news, say a celebrity's got dementia and they want someone local to talk about dementia broadly. So that's that sort of instance. So when it comes to being interviewed in the media, things to remember: know who your audience is, because that can vary. Is it a lay audience? Is it an academic audience? What's the context? Know your key messages. So it's always good to go in with about 5 key messages and know what they are and keep them simple. So especially if if it's digital, if it's a newspaper interview over the phone, or if it's radio, have those 5 key messages in front of you. Do some rehearsing. Know what you want to say and why you want to say it. Give yourself time before the interview to get in the right frame of mind. So good to write down those dot points, have a think about what you're going to say, have a think about who the audience is, have a think about what you want the result to be. And then it's easier said than done, but relax, because the journalist, in the context of science communication, they want it to go well. You want it to go well. They want to understand your research. They want other people listening to understand what you're doing. And it's generally a really positive thing, unlike politics, where they might be trying to catch the politician out. You don't have to worry about that, because typically the journalist is on your side. So have your 5 key messages there in front of you if you can. If it's a TV interview, maybe have that written in your notes on your phone, in your pocket, and have a quick glance at it beforehand. Make sure that you're avoiding jargon. That's one of the main battles that we have in science communication. Is scientists are used to communicating academically, which can be very long and drawn out and not particularly amenable to short grabs, which is what we need for it to translate to the general public. So we need to prep how we're going to explain our research in lay terms. So it's helpful to think of how would you summarize it if you were talking to a friend at a barbecue or someone you hadn't met and they said, oh, what do you do? If you can briefly describe that in language they understand, that's what we're looking for when we're communicating with the media for a mainstream audience. So it's good to actually figure out how to explain your research in that lay terms fashion prior to doing the interview, rather than trying to think of it on the spot. Make sure you're engaged and you sound interested. This is particularly important for radio and for TV. You need to perform. You need to sort of amp yourself up a bit above what you normally would for it to translate in a way that you sound interested in what you're doing. If you just talk like you normally do, there's a good chance that it will come across as pretty monotone and flat. So it's important to perform when you're speaking. Speak slowly and clearly. Try to take your time. Don't be in a rush. We know that when we're nervous and we're doing public speaking, we can often really rush through everything that we have to say. But just remember that you're the one in control. So take your time, speak clearly. And then the other point is don't overtalk. So something that really helps our researchers here is just reminding people to answer the question that they're asked. I think naturally we can jump from one thing to another. We start answering the question, then we think of something else. That's another point. Then we start saying that. Then we start saying the next thing. And before we know it, we've been talking for 90 seconds and we've lost track of what we're saying. And it wasn't as potent or as useful as it could have been if we just answered the question. So just keep it simple and just do one question after another. And remember that you're the expert. They're more scared of you than you are of them, sort of thing. So you're the one who knows what you're talking about, and you've just got to lean into that and remember that. Okay. So when we're thinking about our key messages, what points do you need to get across to feel like the interview was a success? So just do a bit of imagination beforehand and think about, if I say X, Y, Z and I manage to get this message across, then I'm going to feel like this went well. That's what we want to build your key messages around. So very simply, what is important, what's relevant, what's exciting about what you're doing? Why should people care about your research? It's always handy if you can think of an analogy to help people relate. So something really simple. So one thing that comes to mind, we have a researcher here called Tim Sargent, and he specializes in autophagy, very complex as all scientific work is. And he describes autophagy as the body's process of recycling junk from cells. So a very simple way to explain something very complicated that someone driving in their car listening can go, oh yeah, that makes sense. So if you can think of one of those, that's always really handy. Is there anything that you don't want to discuss? And if yes, plan how you'll respond if you're asked about it. And make sure you're using your key messages as your guide always and your safety net. So have them in front of you if you can. Definitely prepare them prior to if you can't look at them during. And just even if you're pretty confident you know what you're going to say, just write that down, have a look at it, work it through in your head, and don't overcomplicate things. 3 key points, 5 key points, doesn't have to turn into an essay. So for newspaper and online, this is typically going to be a phone interview with a journalist, although sometimes they'll just email you some questions and you can email back your answers. Prep your key points, have your lay terms, explanations, and keep them handy. And then, yes, make it easy on yourself and don't get bogged down in the detail unless it's a scientific publication. So, one example, we recently had Sunuri in the media, and she did an article with Cosmos, which is a science publication and likes a bit more detail. And so she had to go a bit more scientific with that interview, but then also did a story with the advertiser, and that was a bit more lay. So again, knowing your audience is important. Radio can be live or pre-recorded in the studio over the phone, typically over the phone, unless you've got time to go in the studio. If you do, it's always best to do it in person. You'll typically get more out of it and find it a bit easier because you can read the host's facial expressions and it can sort of ease into having more of a conversation. It is typically live, although sometimes they'll do pre-records and play them at a later date. Performing and being more animated and being engaged, particularly important in this sort of a scenario, so that when people are listening, it comes across as you're really interested in what you're talking about, and inherently they're going to be interested in what you're talking about. Treat it like a conversation, less like a formal interview. Try to build some rapport with the host. They'll try to build some rapport with you. It'll help you relax. It'll help you communicate more effectively. Avoid over talking. Part of that communication and that conversation is you answer the question, then you let the reporter ask another question, and then it's a conversation and it flows rather than you just talk and they sort of lose interest and tune out and it can fall apart a bit. If you make a mistake on live radio, that's okay. You're not expected to be perfect. If you realize it in the moment, you can correct yourself and say, sorry, I just said this stat, and actually that's incorrect. It's this stat. Or if you can't correct yourself in the moment, at the end of the interview, you said, oh, earlier I said X, that was incorrect. Actually, it was Y. And that's absolutely fine. And also with radio, be aware that you might get listeners phoning in to ask their own questions. I'm just back on that one. If you get listeners phoning in with their own questions, sometimes they might ask specific clinical questions that they need to get their doctor to answer. So in that case, you just need to respond by saying, I'm not a clinician. You'd need to speak to your doctor. But generally, if I speak to the research or what we do know, I can say X. And then TV. So TV interviews are usually pre-recorded and not live. It's rare that you do a live TV interview. Make sure you're looking professional. Wear plain colors. If you wear stripes and patterns, they can strobe on camera, which doesn't look great. You often will be interviewed for 10 minutes, maybe even longer, and they might use 5 or 10 seconds of it in the end, which can make you feel a bit shortchanged, but it's just how that medium works. For that reason, try to speak in 6 to 12-second grabs. There's no use giving journalists minute-long answers in this context because they're going to have to cut it down really short anyway. So think about how you can respond in little sound bites that they're going to be able to just chop and use. You look at the journalists when you're answering, not down the barrel of the camera. Try to forget that the camera's there, although that can be difficult when there's a giant camera near your face, but looking at the journalist helps. Stick to those key points. Make it easy on the journalists. Again, they're not trying to catch you out. They don't understand your work like you do. They don't know what the key points are that you need to get across, and you can direct that. You can be the one to say, hey, this is what's important. This is what we need to focus on. And they'll go with that and they'll be happy with that you're on top of it and you know what you're talking about. If you have a journalist asking the same question over and over in a slightly different way, they're looking for a punchier response where the way you're saying it isn't quite hitting the mark for their audience. They think that you could say it in a more interesting way, that they could use that grab more effectively. So have a go at reframing the way you're saying things if they're not quite satisfied with how you're saying it. Okay, and then interview troubleshooting. So a few possible scenarios. You ask something that you're not comfortable answering. So redirect to a key point. You can say, that's not my area of expertise or focus. What we do know is, and then reiterate that key point. So batting it back. You don't have to answer absolutely everything that you're asked. Sometimes you'll get a bit of a curveball that doesn't really make sense or is a bit irrelevant, or it's just something that you want to avoid. And you can say, I'm not at liberty to speak to that, or that's not my thing, but what I can say is, and then go back to your key points. Okay, so an article you've been involved in has inaccurate information. In this situation, you can alert your media team and they can contact the journalist to get that error corrected. That's only for a digital article. So say the advertiser's online article or the ABC's online article, we can get in touch with the journalist and say that there's something incorrect in there and they'll be able to edit it. Typically, you're not going to get things redacted on TV or on radio, but we can change it for digital. And it's being really clear when we do the interview and beforehand in explaining the story to the journalist, it's less likely that these errors are going to happen. It happens quite rarely. So if your mind goes blank and you've always got those key points in front of you as your safety net that you can return to, and you can say, sorry, can you please repeat the question? And the journalist probably reframe that in a way that you're able to respond and gives you a bit of time to respond. So I would just say you're not supposed to be perfect. This is about communicating in a free-flowing, natural way. And you don't have to put heaps of pressure on yourself that you have to get absolutely everything correct. Just remember some of these key points and you can make it a lot easier on yourself and easier on the people that you're working with. Cool. All right, that's it. I'll hand over to Leo.
Thanks, Callum. That was really great. Now over to you, Tulio. And again, if anyone has questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A and we can address them after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Callum. I'll start by mentioning something that came to mind listening to your presentation. We noticed something interesting with media releases and videos, that these journalists love to have a video embedded in the media release. And we noticed that when doing a video for Flinders Uni researchers, and we found our video to be in an article on the advertiser online, even above the title, so in the most prominent location you could possibly put it, above the title. It was incredible. And so I got in touch with the writer, which back then was Claire Peddy, and she said, oh, we must have videos for online content, please more. So there I learned that if you have some video content, it can really help your press release have better chances of being picked up and actually covered. So just small segue because it was very relevant following Callum's presentation. All right, so today we're gonna talk about slides, how to present effectively, and because we have only 25 minutes, I'm gonna focus on slide presentation. So I'll give you a very quick introduction. All right, I'll just raise the desk so I'm in a better position. Okay, so just a quick introduction. A few years ago, that number tends to grow. I was a PhD student out of the uni in marine biology, working on climate change. And finally, at some point, my paper was published. I was very happy. Mom was very proud, but the initial excitement faded away because I realized, okay, let's be honest, who's going to read this paper? It was like 11 pages long, full of jargon and convoluted sentences, just not very palatable for the average Joe out there. And because the research was about climate change and had a public relevance, I wasn't happy with that. It felt that the potential impact of the research was a bit on a leash. limited by the intrinsic limitations of this format. So what I did is that I leveraged some graphic design skills I had from since my teenage years. I like to play around with graphic design, and I worked as a freelancer for years, making flyers and posters for events. And so I used that skill set, and I was able to put together a animation video that really took the research to new places, because all of a sudden we were seen by thousands and even won prizes in science communication. So this was a wonderful experience. And when I presented this story to other researchers at a conference, I noticed that many told me, "Oh, I wish I could do the same. I really like what you did. I just don't know how to do it, or I don't have the time." And so that's what pushed me to then, when I finished my PhD, to start my agency, Animate Your Science. And for the past 7 years, we've been helping researchers from all over the world communicate their beautiful work so that they can have a bigger impact. So that's a bit about myself and what I do. Let's now dive into how not to kill people with our slides, with our PowerPoint. We've all had this experience, especially I find research conferences to be particularly bad and really hard to endure for many hours, because most presentations, unfortunately, have problems, which we're about to discuss, and they tend to put people to sleep. So the first point to get across is that slides are there just as an aid. They should not be the centerpiece. You, the presenter, are the centerpiece. You are the presenter. The slides are there just to help you. And those slides should not be treated as a dumping ground for all your content, all your graphs, all your graphics, paragraphs, sentences, bullet points. Do not treat them like a dumping ground. It's quite the opposite. Only carefully curated information should make it onto these slides. In fact, if you present a slide of this kind, it doesn't make you look smart at all. In fact, it's just confusing, unwanted, useless, boring, and also, I would say, selfish, because it doesn't keep into account the viewer who's just looking at this for the first time and has just a few seconds to figure it out, and there's just no chance they're going to be able to understand what's going on in this diagram. So it's just not the way to go. So the mantra to follow is this: less is more. So in your slides, the more minimalistic they are, the better and more effective they will be. And there's this concept in visual design called negative space, which I hope is one of the key things you'll remember from my presentation today. And what is negative space? It's basically all the blue on this slide. It's all the space that is not occupied by text or graphics. And why does it matter? Well, I'll explain why that matters with an example. Here we have Yahoo, which is a search engine. But imagine you need to search for something, you go to Yahoo, and before you even enter your search term in the bar, you get distracted by this headline: Russian tourist gives birth in the Red Sea, and you're like, what the heck? And you click on that, and before you know it, you're lost down a rabbit hole of clickbait. You will forget what you wanted to search and have just a terrible user experience. This is an interface that is too busy, has no negative space, and in fact makes the search bar really hard to find, when in reality the search bar should be immediate to find. Well, I don't know you, but I'm familiar with a different search engine called Google, and their interface is quite the opposite. And it lets you do only one thing, the thing that matters. It's a search engine, it lets you search, full stop. No ads, no clickbait, no weather forecast, nothing like that. So we just have the search bar, and all the rest is negative space. So that it's what matters is easy to find. So negative space is your friend in a way. It's something you can use, a bit of like a superpower, to draw attention to the important stuff, because it's Yeah, it's quite magical. Like it's really one of those design principles that gives you incredible control over the experience of the viewer on the other side. You also can think of art galleries. I don't know if you had the experience of going to a high-end art gallery or a very cheap, low-level art gallery. Typically, in the cheap low-level ones, there's paintings everywhere, one on top of each other. Every single inch of the wall is covered. While if you go to the high-end art gallery, you just have one key piece per room and very few other things. That's also an example of what negative space is. So another key thing to remember that our brain is hardwired to process visuals, graphics, images much faster than it can process text. So let me ask you, what did you look at first when I turned this slide? Did you read the text or did you look at the octopus? I'm sure you looked at the octopus. And that's because that's how our brain works. So keep that in mind, because if your slides are not visual, they're not going to be really catchy, eye-catching, and very effective. Always, for every single slide you make, there should be some visual that is related to the point you're trying to make. And another key takeaway is that a good slide contains only one key message. So slides that have many points tend to have that same problem of the Yahoo interface. It gets confusing and the important stuff tends to get lost. If you instead choose the opposite approach of just having one idea per slide, well, people cannot get lost. There's just one thing on the slide, so everyone will be with you, and you're 100% sure that people are following you. So I'll show you some examples now. And on the top right, you have this indicator of how good, if it's in the green, or bad, if it's in the red, a slide is. This is an example of a pretty terrible slide because it has a wall of text, really not much visuals at all, and long sentences, almost paragraphs. So definitely not the way to go. Go 5 points per slide is way too much. So can we make it better? Yes, this is, I would say, one step better because we now have an eye-catching visual, which will grab people's attention, but we still have 3 points and quite a bit of text. So I'm still not 100% happy with this. How about this one? This one is it's a slide that I start to like because again, there's a key eye catcher, a visual, and the text is very minimal. So you're sure that people are actually going to consume it and get the message and not get lost. Let's have a look at another example. This is another slide that's not very effective because the text is blocky. And when the text is blocky, the viewer doesn't even want to start because, you know, if they're listening to you, they're not going to read more than a handful of words. So having a blocky text box like that is just, it's like if it wasn't there. It's not going to help you in any way. It's just going to actually work against you. So something like this can be easily improved by turning it into something like this. Just drill down to, you know, boil down your message to those few keywords. And remember that the slides are just visual aid. They're there to help you, but you are the presentation, not your slides. So please, I hope everyone listening today will stop making slides that have lots and lots of text and long sentences, because they're really not working. That's the reality of things. If you have slides of this kind, that they're just not gonna produce the result you would expect them to produce. Another point, which is not obvious to many, is how you can use font size, again, to have control over what people look at. So let me explain. Font size is also important for accessibility, because way too many times I've been at conferences and found, 4 charts on one slide. And not only that, but the axes of those charts were so tiny that it was impossible to read what was displayed. And so unless you have eagle vision, this is an accessibility problem. People cannot read what's on your slides. That's a problem of accessibility. And the other thing about fonts is that they give a certain, they put you in control of what people look at via hierarchy. So, by the way, I'm getting a bit lost in my words. I'm very jet lagged. I arrived just yesterday from Europe. So apologies if I get lost at times. That's why. So let's discuss this hierarchy. This is how it works. You automatically look at the bigger thing. In this slide, there are no visuals like the octopus we've seen earlier. So what you will do, the first thing, you will read the bigger text, and then you go to the not so big one, and then to the smaller one, and then to the tiny one at the top, maybe, if you even bother getting there. So be purposeful in the way you use font sizes because they really are another powerful tool to put you in control of how people go through your content. Another point is that we're all used to these PowerPoint templates that typically have a title at the top and a few bullet points. If you go to the default settings of PowerPoint, they typically look like that. And there's no issue with that in itself, as long as the title you use has meaning. It's a meaningful title. Because typically the title has the bigger font size, though. So what does that mean? That's what people look at first. But if your title instead says something like introduction, which is not really that important, well, then perhaps change your slide like this. Introduction is not the key thing about that slide, so perhaps put your bullet points bigger so that people look at those first. See, that's how you can use this font size hierarchy to control what people look at first and then after that. And another important principle to remember is that variety really matters. And so just like have a think about a news segment where you've seen a researcher going on television, and have a think about it. It's typically just short 1 or 2 minutes, and it starts with typically the anchor, and then they cut a few seconds later to a shot of the university or the research institute. Then they cut to the lab, then they cut to the researcher, then they cut back to the lab, and every few seconds they change. So it's a very fast-paced number of changes in the scenes. That's why, that's very intentional. And that's because those changes keep us engaged. If nothing changes for, 2 minutes straight in terms of what we're looking at, we get bored. And so changing the slides frequently can really help you keep people engaged. And I'm a big proponent of having slide decks with as many slides as you want, as long as you have that one idea per slide and no more. In fact, I'm against all those formats that force people to have, 1 slide per minute for 7 minutes, those type of things. I think they're quite ill-informed because many slides is good as long as we keep them minimalistic and light. And also don't forget that slides is just one of the many approaches, but you can go back to old school props, and actually that will make your presentation even more effective. Here's an example of a surgeon and my wife explaining with visual analogies using real props what a biofilm infection is. And the surgeon was talking, in this house model, imagine this is your body and the bugs are trying to get inside. And then instead my wife made this slime with toothpaste and soap or something like that. at home, which was quite fun and makes this is something, if you do it, will make the presentation quite memorable and different because people are super used to slides. But this will be different. These days, an old school prop is something you don't see that often. And so have a think. Can you use an old school prop? I think that would be actually a winning strategy. So let's now have a bit of fun and interact together. As you probably have gathered by my accent and name, I'm Italian. My ancestors, the ancient Roman people, will entertain themselves with gladiator shows. We're now going to do a bit of a gladiator show with slides. And what will happen in the arena back then was that when the one gladiator was about to kill the other one, it will stop and ask the Roman people and the emperor what to do. And so then the people will go crazy with the thumbs up if they wanted the person to leave, or thumbs down if they want the person to die. So now we're going to do the same with no violence, of course, but looking at slides. So you can use the chat feature to let me know what you think about the slides you're about to see. So you can type live if you like it, or die if you don't. Okay, let's get started. What do you think about this slide based on what we just discussed? Die, yes, absolutely. This makes pretty much all the mistakes we just discussed. Oh, somebody even figured out the animated emojis. Love it. So this one's definitely a big no-go. But would you believe that this slide says the same thing as this one? You will have no idea because when you see a slide like this, you don't even attempt to read it because there's way too much content. You're automatically overwhelmed and it's just off-putting. But in reality, what I did here is that I grabbed the first 4 points or maybe 5 points and I turned it into this, which is actually comprehensible and easy to process. It was actually a pretty straightforward message. Better hand hygiene, less infection, shorter stays, more admissions. It was a very simple message. How you design your slides really does matter. And, they don't have to be works of art. Just minimal text with some icons like this. It does the job very effectively. What do you think about this slide? Yeah, I see a thumbs down by Rebecca. Christina says die. Yes. Yes, this is also way, way too much content for a single slide. So the emperor here is not impressed. This one is not going to make it. What do you think about this slide? Show me your thumbs or use the chat. Yes, thumbs up. Why is this good? Because we have one visualization, one graph, in this case a map, 2 colors representing data, title, straightforward, no problem. Somebody's saying fonts are too small. Yes, I agree that the areas in drought and abnormally dry could be bigger. I do agree with that. And by the way, this has a black background because I took this one from Al Gore, famous presentation about climate change, which was given in a big theater. And so just for your future reference, if you present in let's say in an office, which is brightly lit, your slides should have a white background to not to be too different from the background. But instead, if you're in a big conference venue with a room that is mostly dark, consider dark slides, because otherwise if you have a dark room and a white slide, it will be quite hard to look at. It will be like probably too bright for the eyes of the people. So this is a good one. How about this? This is a classic meta-analysis classic with tables of data die. Yes. And I've debated this slide many times with people who do meta-analysis, and I do get it that this is how you represent them. But if you show me tables with, I don't know, 100 numbers, what am I supposed to look at? There's way too much information. Just show me the important numbers. I trust you've done your work and that you've done the proper analysis. You don't need to demonstrate that by showing me lots of numbers. It just gives you a false sense of security, really. So not good. By the way, how are we going with time, Agustina?
We have about 9 minutes left, so
Okay,
you
perfect.
can go for another couple minutes, and then we can open up for questions if people have
Okay,
comments or
perfect.
questions.
There should be just a couple more. What about this slide? Do we like it? Do we not? No, die. Yes, absolutely. And I gave the same presentation to people at the WHO, and one of them said, "Yeah, but the United Nations really is that complex. So how are we meant to explain it?" Well, if you put a slide like that, all that you achieve is to tell people we're very complex. That's it. That's all it achieves. If that's your message, fair enough. But if you want to really go through that complexity, you need to break that down and have many, many slides, each one looking at a single idea, so that you can, have, hold people's hands as you go through the whole concept. But yeah, a slide like this, not good. What about a slide like this? Is this effective? Do we like it? Yes. This one I think is very good because it has an image, this child, clearly with some health issue because of that thing in the nose, and minimal text, very effective. This is also, it's a slide with a bit of an emotional charge. Since you guys at SAMRI all work in health, don't be afraid to use pictures of people, patients, people, and it will bring emotion to your presentation, and emotion is a good thing, especially when you communicate to the public. You need that emotional component, otherwise people are not really connecting with it. Okay, I'm gonna cut this one a bit short because time is running out, but another example of a good slide, not much content, easy to figure it out. What about this one instead? No good because 4 different graphs. And if you have 4 graphs on one slide, what am I meant to look at first and what am I meant to look at next? And when you put 4 graphs in a slide, then you present this, 90% of the time people are not able to read what's on the y-axis and the x-axis. So it ends up being pretty useless. So just one chart per slide, remember. Okay, so I think we can wrap it up here and have now, yeah. So my final message for you, well, to recap what we discussed today, is that less is more. So don't try to fit as much as possible into your slide. Quite the opposite. It's like a game of Jenga. How many elements can I take out without the whole structure falling apart? It's very, it's a crucial thing to have only one message per slide so that you're sure that people are with you and they don't get lost and you don't overwhelm them. Because we're not computers, we're just human beings, and we have a limited cognitive capacity. So if you just bombard people with too much, they switch off. You lose them. And also remember this very cool concept of negative space. It really is a superpower, and you should definitely make use of it in your slides so that the important stuff, it's easy to find and clearly stands out. So that is all from me today. Thank you so much for having me. We have a very prolific blog on our website where you can find plenty more information about science communication, especially visual science communication. So feel free to take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tullio. There is one person who did ask a question earlier on, and I think you touched on this a little bit, where you said to use, a dark negative space if you're presenting in a dark room versus bright if you're presenting in a well-lit office. Someone asked a similar question around, is there optimal style for slides that are intended to be delivered online, so webinar versus in person? Should you make considerations? Is there any difference between those two?
Yes, I think that online you will need even more slides because typically when you present in a webinar like this, you kind of disappear as the presenter. You go in this little box, and a presentation is also performance, right? So when it's done in person, your body talks also, and so you're part of that presentation. Unfortunately, when we present online, we tend to disappear, and people mostly hear our voice and see our slides. So I think to keep people engaged and have enough variety to keep them engaged, we need to have an even larger number of slides compared to an in-person presentation where we presenters can also use our body to make our points.
Thanks, Tullio. I'm not sure there's any other questions, but I just wanted to say these were two fantastic presentations. Thanks so much to Callum and Tullio. Callum, I love the reminder that if you're doing, an interview with a journalist live, you have to speak in 6 to 12 second grabs. Like, I think people might forget that. It's really quick. We need to really drive our message across, and hence the importance to really practice what our key message is. Like, what is it that we're trying to say? And it relates to what Tullio said. What's the key message? There's one key message per slide. So I think a key message from this presentation is know what you're trying to convey. Really work on your key points, and make it as simple as possible for the audience to stay engaged with your content, to go through the journey with you. So any concluding comments from both of you?
I'm glad Tullio didn't go first. Because
It was a great presentation.
Could take some things away from his advice regarding the slides. So that's very useful stuff. But I guess, the main thing from our perspective is just keeping it simple, and it just makes it way less scary for you, and it makes it easier for the journalist, and it makes it more effective piece of communication. So do that prep work, get those key messages there, know what they are, and then don't try too hard to explain your entire paper when they're only looking for a short grab or a pretty succinct news story. So I'm just being aware of those things and keeping it nice and short and sweet.
Thanks, Callum.
Yes, I'll add one thing that what Callum presented is really good advice, and I was able to experience this on my own skin during my PhD. Interacting with the media turned out to be a wonderful experience. I was a bit scared of it at the beginning, but it was great. I ended up doing several radio interviews, and from the media release that the university put out, then we had coverage from international publications, which blew my mind, really. So this stuff can be really, really effective. So yes, I do encourage you to leverage those tools of engaging with traditional media, because it is powerful. And it's still very much relevant, even in the age of social media.
Thanks, Tullio. Thanks, Tullio and Callum. And yes, I think this topic, communicating research, is so important, considering that, the majority of research that's published lives on the shelf, really. So it's how do we move research from the shelf to actually being, more broadly known by the public and used by the people who will be affected by the research. So this concludes our Spotlight series for September and also for 2024. Here is just a list of the previous topics that we have covered, all relating to research translation. And we are always happy to consider new topics. So if you've attended or if you've listened to previous webinars and you think we should cover different topics, please reach out to us. And if you want to share the Spotlight series with your colleagues or your networks, all the recordings and associated resources live on our website at HTSA. So please make your way there. And I would just like to thank the speakers once again, and stay informed with HTSA for any future Spotlight series or other initiatives. So thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Bye. Bye, everyone.